What I'm about to tell you happened. I've got trip notes, survey data, and 3 friends who'll back up every word of it. We've been back to look for the entrance since. We haven't found it. Not once. This is the story of what we found the one time we did. It started at a bar off Highway 27, the kind of place that survives on regulars. My friend Derek, the risk taker of our group, always has been, leans over and says, "You're not going to believe this." He'd heard a story from an old-timer. Coon dog goes down a hole hunting, doesn't come back. 3 days later, they hear that same dog barking from almost 2 miles away, underground the whole way. Now, the source wasn't exactly reliable, but my friend Miles, our maps and gear guy, made a point that stuck with me. Pulaski County is riddled with karst, sinkholes, cave systems, and by his estimate, maybe 60% of it properly explored. That leaves a lot of dark nobody's ever put a light into. There were 4 of us: Derek, Miles, our friend Sadie, the calmest person I've ever caved with. Nothing rattled her. And me. I'm Aaron. I'm the one who writes it all down. That instinct is the only reason this story exists at all. We spent 3 weeks just researching old land records, sinkhole databases, LiDAR data. Miles found 3 depressions in the terrain clustered close together, a sign they might all feed the same underground system. Might was doing a lot of work in that sentence, but it was somewhere to start. We did 3 scouting hikes before we ever brought real gear. Most of what we found was nothing. Shallow sinks, dead ends. But on the 4th trip, we found 2 real candidates. Narrow slots in gray limestone, 400 yards apart. Both of them were breathing. Cool air pushing out, the way a live cave breathes on a warm day. That's when we knew we had something worth pursuing. We gave ourselves 8 days to prepare. 400 feet of rope, redundant lights on every helmet because losing light underground is the fastest way to die down there. Food calculated by the calorie. A satellite messenger checking in with my sister every 12 hours. If 2 check-ins passed with no word, she was calling for a search. The night before we left, none of us said much. There's a particular kind of quiet before a big trip. Equal parts excitement and a small, cold voice in the back of your head reminding you that caves have killed people more experienced than us. Derek said, "Last chance to back out." Nobody backed out. We hiked in at first light, packs heavier than any of us wanted to admit. The first entrance we checked dead-ended in less than an hour. Solid flowstone, no way through. 1 down. That's caving. Mostly a game played against your own patience. The second entrance was different. It dropped into a pit almost 200 feet deep, deeper than we expected from what was supposed to be a scouting trip. At the bottom, we found a second drop, even deeper. We dropped a rock in, 6 seconds before we heard anything, and what we heard wasn't stone. It was a splash. Water, a long way down. We debated turning back right there. In the end, we compromised. Rig it properly, confirm it led somewhere real, and come back better prepared if it did. It took 2 hours to rig that second pit safely. Derek went down first, like always. Then his voice came back up through the dark. "There's a passage down here, walking height, and I can hear water." We made camp on the surface that night, muscles aching, adrenaline slowly draining out of us. Derek couldn't stop talking about that sound of water. "That's not a dead end," he kept saying. "That's flow. Flow means it goes somewhere." The next morning, the passage did what cave passages do when they're testing your commitment. It shrank. First a crouch, then a crawl, then a gap barely wider than a rib cage. Derek went in first, breathing all the air out of his lungs just to fit. We didn't hear from him for what felt like a very long time. Then, muffled through all that stone, "It opens! You have to see this!" One at a time we went in. 280 feet of continuous squeeze. 3 points where I genuinely thought I might be stuck for good. I felt real panic in there, the kind that closes up your throat. I made myself breathe, slow, and I kept going. And then, all at once, the passage let go of us. I was on my hands and knees in a much larger space. The air felt different, moving, cooler, echoing. Derek turned in a slow circle and said, Guys, I don't think this is a passage anymore. We'd crossed a stream and found ourselves in a chamber that kept getting bigger the further we walked into it. Our lights couldn't touch a wall and the ceiling at the same time. By Miles's altimeter, we were roughly a mile down and in, deeper than any of us had ever gone in a single push. We killed our headlamps, all four at once, an old caver's ritual. You do it to feel the true dark, the kind that doesn't exist anywhere on the surface of the earth. No residual light, no horizon glow, just nothing. I could hear my own heartbeat. Derek finally broke the silence. "Okay," he said, "we camp here." The next stretch humbled us in a different way. Narrow ledges above black pools, 2 more vertical drops, one so deep our rock drop test took over 5 seconds. We used almost all our remaining rope getting past it. Derek marked every junction obsessively now. Even he understood, a cave this size doesn't forgive a party that gets careless about its own trail. By what our watches called late afternoon, we made our second camp. Miles did the math out loud. 2.5 miles of passage, close to a mile of net depth, further inside a mountain, he said, than almost anyone in the history of Kentucky caving had ever documented going. It should have felt triumphant. Mostly, it felt heavy. Day 3 is the one that changed everything. We were descending a steep slope when Derek stopped dead. Ahead of us was an opening cut into the wall, and it was perfectly round. Not roughly round, the way natural passages sometimes are. Perfectly round. Smooth-walled. No striations, no mineral buildup, just even, consistent stone, curving downward at a steady grade. There was airflow coming out of it. That part wasn't strange. Caves breathe. What was strange was the temperature. Cave air at that depth should sit around 55 degrees. This air was warm. Not hot. Somewhere in the low 70s. Like stepping onto a porch on a mild spring evening, 2.5 miles under a mountain. We sat at that tunnel mouth for the better part of an hour, arguing with ourselves as much as each other. We were on day 3. Rope was almost gone. But none of us wanted to walk out of that mountain for the rest of our lives wondering what was down there. We agreed, 1 more day's travel. If it didn't resolve into something explainable, we'd turn around, no matter what we found. The tunnel held its perfect shape for over a mile. Somewhere in that last stretch, a hum started. Low, almost below hearing. You felt it in your chest more than your ears. It was Derek who finally said out loud what we were all noticing. "You guys hear that? Or is it just me?" It wasn't just him. The tunnel ended without warning. Open space where our lights found nothing. It took several minutes of careful movement before we understood what we'd walked into. The room was square. 4 walls, true right angles, confirmed with a compass and a level. The walls were polished flat, almost reflective, like dark, wet glass. Each side roughly 400 feet. The ceiling close to 1,000 feet above us. Nobody spoke for a long time. Sadie finally said what we were all thinking. "This isn't natural. Water doesn't carve a perfect square. It doesn't polish stone like this." Derek asked the only question that mattered. Made by who? 2 miles under a mountain in Pulaski County, Kentucky? None of us had an answer. On the far wall, Miles found another opening. Not round this time, square, 5 feet by 5 feet, running dead straight into the dark. We turned our headlamps off at its mouth, all 4 of us together, and far down that hallway, at a distance none of us could judge, there was light. We made camp at the edge of that room. I laid out the responsible argument. We were 3 days deep, rope nearly gone, we could come back properly resourced. Derek argued the opposite, that this might be the only chance any of us ever got. We compromised. 1/2 mile down that hallway. Enough to understand the light, no further. None of us slept more than an hour or 2 that night. We started down the passage the next morning. About a 1/4 mile in, the dark around us began to change. Not suddenly, gradually. Our headlamps started to feel less necessary. By the 1/2 mile mark, it was undeniable. The passage itself was lit, faintly, from no source any of us could identify. The passage ended at another room, larger than the first, with 6 identical openings around its perimeter, and on the walls, carvings. Rows of angular geometric symbols organized the way a written language is organized. Derek said it best. Somebody read this. Somebody was meant to read this. The hum had grown louder here, and it had texture now. Not quite mechanical, not quite organic. We chose the passage most directly opposite where we'd entered, and we went in. 200 feet later, the passage opened into a smaller chamber, and this one wasn't empty. A dozen statues stood in a wide circle, each 9 or 10 feet tall, facing inward toward a raised structure at the center, something close to an altar. The heads were too large for the bodies, faceted, almost insectile. No clear eyes, just smooth indentations, like something wearing a mask rather than something with a face of its own. In one hand, every figure held a long, bent staff. In the other, something close to a satchel held against the torso. We had no framework for what we were looking at, and then we heard it. Faint at first, a high, chittering sound, repeating in short bursts. In any other place, it would have sounded like birdsong. Here, 2.5 miles under a mountain, ringed by statues with insect faces, it was the most frightening sound any of us had ever heard. It got louder. Not all at once, steadily. More voices joining the first, coming from the direction we'd just walked from. Nobody discussed a plan. Some older, faster part of every one of us decided at the same moment. We ran. I don't remember that run in any coherent order. Flashes, my own breathing loud in my ears. Derek's back ahead of me. We didn't stop until we'd covered most of the mile back to the square room. The ambient light faded behind us. Our headlamps were the only thing holding back the dark again. We stood there gasping, listening. I'm not certain, even now, whether the sound had actually stopped or whether it had just dropped below the range we could tell apart from our own hearts pounding. Sadie thought she still heard it, twice in the hour after. Derek thought so too. We didn't sleep again at that camp. We packed what we could and started back, up the round tunnel, through the breakdown, up both big drops on ascenders, arms burning by the second one. It took 2 full days to reach the surface, moving faster than the descent had, running almost entirely on fear. Somewhere in that final squeeze, the one that had terrified me on the way in, Sadie, ahead of me in the dark, said quietly, "I think I hear it again." Nobody answered her. We just moved a little faster. We emerged into daylight on the evening of the 5th day, filthy, thinner than we'd gone in. We sat at that cave mouth a long time before anyone said a word, just breathing open air, watching the sun go down over a ridgeline that, 12 hours earlier, we would have sworn held nothing but limestone and roots. We went back 3 times over the next 2 years, all 3 times retracing our same steps, same maps. Each time, everything looked so different, but we were never able to relocate the entrance. So we really don't know. Maybe that cave opening has just been severely covered with overgrowth and sealed back up. Maybe the opening collapsed. We don't know. It was just absent, like the hillside itself had quietly rearranged. On the 3rd trip, we brought ground-penetrating radar. It showed exactly what you'd expect from ordinary Kentucky karst. Nothing on the scale of what we knew from direct experience existed somewhere underneath that hillside. We haven't gone back a 4th time. Derek still brings it up. Sadie doesn't talk about it much anymore. Miles keeps his notes in a folder he doesn't open often. When I asked him once what he thought that hum actually was, he said, "I've stopped trying to have a theory. I don't think having one is going to make me feel better." Whatever made the light was, and that square passage, the polished walls, and perfect symmetrics of the room, and the weird, creepy statues, and the light. We weren't using our flashlights then. What or where was the light coming from? The altar-looking thing with the statues all around it? All the hieroglyph-type carvings? And there were doors behind and on both sides. Where did they lead? What else is down there? I often wonder what if we would have kept pushing, or could find it again. What do they lead to? And that what gets me, what digs at me. Is it still down there? Is the light still glowing? There's open corridors and spaces deep below us, closed to time, from an ancient or even possibly current world we have lost touch with, that is now separate and lost, or just not included in everyday modern understanding. But it is down there, waiting to be rediscovered, patient, indifferent to whether four tired, frightened cavers ever work up the nerve to come looking again.
And so far we haven't. Not yet.
Thank you for taking the time to listen. This is based on a true story. Stay curious. Hope you all have a good night, and see you next time.